Parks, Transportation Services, and in any other financial issues as the committee so chooses. We are resuming from our 7 o'clock meeting time now that the Board of Selectmen has concluded their business. Welcome to everybody. Special welcome to Mary Jane. Because you're new tonight, as a matter of record, your chairman told me that you were trying to get a letter because of a potential conflict of interest.
Yes, I did get some paperwork that were in it. I'm not going to be, I'm just going to verification. Is that okay?
No. I was suggesting that perhaps you would refrain from voting, but I don't think you should refrain from speaking.
Okay. Well, I would anyway because the paperwork is in the process.
Well, from the chairman's perspective, your input is welcome, and we don't take that many votes anyway because we're here to develop consensus. So feel free to contribute as you see fit. Okay? Why does it seem like oh, that's why, because there's normally 6 or 7 people. Got it. Okay. Last time, I thought we made some progress with respect to trying to understand the costs associated with the provision of transportation services. The presentation that was made at the very end showed that it looked like privatization would cost the town a little over $2.6 million when you included the fuel, which we would be purchasing for the low bidder, plus the athletic trips, field trips, and a variety of other things that were add-on, because after a certain point it was an a la carte menu depending on how much we utilized it. That's as compared to $1.5 million approximately currently, if you include fuel for services provided as a part of the town. To that must be added, as we discussed, a certain amount of capital spending every year, basically forever. Now, you can debate how much capital spending is. It should be, you could use $400,000. Mr. Slavin suggested it perhaps should be $450,000, allowing for $90,000 per vehicle. That was depreciated over a 10-year life of the vehicle with no residual value, producing a fleet that averaged 5 years. If you did apples to apples, even though our vendors have suggested it really didn't influence their bid, and depreciated over 7 years instead of 10, and produced a fleet that averaged a little over 3 years, that would add about $260,000 of depreciation. So if you added that, essentially a worst-case scenario, to the $1.5 million, you're looking at approximately a $500,000 difference between the low bidder and what it would cost to operate us as a transportation department, assuming you had depreciated about 667,000 to be precise, over every year forever. So that $500,000 to me, and now I'll speak less factually and perhaps more editorially, is a tribute to the way this department was set up right from the get-go, meaning that we recognized, not we, someone before me, recognized the value of having employees stay part-time, not collect benefits, and to do it ourselves. That tradition of trying to be as cost-effective as possible was carried on right through. We have one of the people who did that at this table. Her successor is continuing to do that, and I think that's part of the reason. I noticed in the article that was sent to me by Mr. Slavin, Concord, Mass. is currently struggling with this very issue. The impetus behind their struggle actually is because they need the space where the transportation department is, and they've calculated it would cost somewhere about $1.5 million just to move the department to a different location. We, of course, spent about $150,000 on our building. They are also, I noticed, their employees are working 25 hours a week collecting benefits to produce not only active employee costs, but also retired employee costs. So I think that's probably the biggest reason that we have this approximately $500,000 saving. Now, we can certainly continue to talk about costs and other issues, but I would like, with the committee's approval, to get on to the issue of what alternatives might exist if we wanted to either find the money to do, find the money to continue to support the Transportation Department, because right now it is not, in fact, we're not capable of supporting it at the financial level sufficient to maintain it. And that would be true whether it was privatization or whether it was just internally as a department. It's just not sufficient funds primarily because of the capital investment necessary on an annual basis, but also because of the operating basis. And for that, the primary reason is because the number of sped miles has dramatically increased. I should add sped and homeless miles has dramatically increased. I do have a note since that committee meeting, which was 2 weeks ago. I was at a Cape Cod Collaborative meeting, and I have now found out that there is legislation at the state level to reimburse cities and towns for the transportation of the homeless. It turns out that Wareham has one of the highest expenditures in that category. They calculated that in FY11, we spent $132,000 transporting the homeless back to their, what would you call it, where they have roots, and because that's where they want to be. And they've estimated that that would drop from 132 to 125. If that compares very favorably in terms of size. It's very much higher than almost any other community around, and in fact, it compares to some of the larger communities in the state, even cities. So that's a potential source of revenue. Mark, you have something on that?
Just quickly, and I was going to mention it at a opportune time somewhere on the agenda, that yes, the state auditor did find, the state auditor, Suzanne Bump, did find that communities have been shackled with this unfunded mandate that the state has put upon cities and towns, and that yes, in fact, Wareham does come out in the top tier. I will be up on Beacon Hill tomorrow with this legislation in hand, and I'll be looking at other ways to try to see if her report to the legislature will fit in a timely way. I think it's close to 11.5 or close to $12 million of expenses that could go quickly into the appropriations process, Mr. Chairman, and make a big difference because those are recurring expenses that, in my opinion, as hard as we have tried, and we've had now a new effort to end homelessness in Wareham, we will continue to have these costs put upon us. And so I'll try to get some read for not only this action committee, but also for the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Mark, you made a good point, and that is the reason this being considered for funding is because it is perceived to be that unfunded mandate, and there is, in fact, laws against unfunded mandates. So let's hope that that generates some money. But in any event, there are two ways, in my mind, to look at the problem once you concede that we don't have enough money to support the current operation. One way, obviously, and we can certainly discuss that, is to simply put more money into it. The other way, and I want to make it clear, this is not a recommendation, but for discussion purposes, I think it has to be on the table because some communities have decided to do this. The other way is to literally reduce the level of service or to make it more expensive for the end users. Both are possible. In fact, it's really an and/or situation. It's not an or situation. In working with the Transportation Department, it was clear that you could reduce the fleet by 13 buses, create 3 tiers of busing times as compared to the 2 tiers that we have today. And by tiers, I mean right now, buses go out, pick up children, take them to schools, and then they go back and they pick up more students, take them to schools. Those are 2 tiers. If you went to a 3-tier system, you could reduce the fleets significantly. The elementary fleet would drop down to 10. The middle school, and specifically the 6th grade fleet, would drop down to 5. So you'd be transporting only K through 6, and 7 through 12 students would be on their own to get to school. The savings associated with that is considerable, meaning that you could save on the order of about $300,000 if you include the reduced depreciation, because your depreciation costs would drop from about $400,000 a year literally to about $300,000 a year because you're supporting simply a smaller fleet. So that's one way of doing it. So let me repeat. You stop providing service to grades 7 through 12. You do provide service through grades K through 6, and you go to 3 tiers, which means the east side of town for elementary, the west side of town for elementary and middle school, and the number of buses would drop by 13. You would also, unfortunately, have to change the times associated with starting and stopping school to allow for those 50-minute tiers to occur. So we're talking about a number of disadvantages, and I'll just tick them off. Clearly, there would be an inconvenience for all the parents associated with no longer having service. Dr. Rabinovich has indicated that where this has occurred in other communities, attendance has dropped, which is a huge problem. Even though we received a waiver associated with some aspects of No Child Left Behind, the fact is that attendance waiver, I do not believe, has been touched, which means that we have to average 95% attendance or we get in trouble. So it would threaten our ability to maintain 95% attendance. You would also inevitably have a whole lot of traffic twice a day right around Viking Drive and Route 6, because all those people that were taking the bus would now be in individual vehicles. So that would be something that people would notice twice a day. Frankly, you'd probably notice it around town in general. It would just be most acute around the Viking Drive, Route 6, Marion Road area. You would also have a safety issue, because studies have shown that bus transportation is by far the safest route for getting a child from their home to the school. With all these increased number of vehicles, you're inevitably going to have some number of accidents. And of course, with all the increased traffic, you're going to have some tardiness issues as well as the attendance issues. So there's a lot of reasons why, in my own mind, and I repeat, I am not speaking for the committee, but in my own mind, this seems like a very poor idea of reducing services to a very small part of our population because we can't fund it at its current level. The second alternative, which would save money but not quite as much, the reason it doesn't save quite as much is primarily because you're still running the same size fleet, is to start charging fees. Now, fees are also not something that is unusual around the state. They range from about as low as $100 a year per child, some even slightly lower than that, and they cap it at $100 for family or something like that, all the way up to one child for close to $500 a year. So it literally runs the gamut. If you did what is essentially the low end, which would be approximately $1 a day, $180 a year, you could raise about $200,000 a year. Now, where does that number come from? You start with the fact that we have approximately 3,000 students. Then you look at K through 6, and you realize that although you can charge them, you can't charge any of them if they're under the free and reduced lunch program. And you can't charge any of them if they're further than 2 miles away. So that immediately reduces the size of that 3,000 student population, the cohort. Now the 7 through 12 group you can charge, but the free and reduced lunch group are also exempt. So in the end, it came down to about 1,150 kids. It's an estimate, it's a round number, but the problem with using that number to calculate the approximately 200,000 you would save is you have no idea how parents are going to react to being charged $180 a year. Some of them will gratefully take it because it's tremendously inconvenient if they don't get their children to school via bus. Others will say either they can't afford it, or they're going by the school anyway, or they'd rather carpool with neighbors, or any number of other solutions that might occur to people, which means that that 1,150 could drop significantly depending on the reaction of our taxpayers and our parents to the fees. You also obviously have the administrative issue of collecting the fees, which is a burden on the school system. So it can be done. It has the theoretical potential for generating about $200,000, but I would see that as the upper end of what we could expect. It turns out that the difference between the preliminary budget and what we put in for a non-net school transportation budget is about $200,000. So it is theoretically a way that we could close the operating gap, but of course, neither solution, unless you combine the two and do both, neither solution makes a significant dent in the capital problem of getting a fleet together that would average 5 years of age with no bus older than 10. So those are two options. I don't recommend them, but sometimes you end up doing things that you don't want to do just because there aren't good alternatives or the taxpayers send a strong message. There's just no more revenue to be had in any other way. So I will enjoy stopping talking and let people ask me questions about what I've just said. Yes? No.
Thanks, Chet. I have a couple questions. Actually, you kind of answered a bunch that I'd already written down. However, my question is this. The operational costs have increased, no
Yes.
question. And you're saying that a great deal of the operational costs have increased as a result of the SPED issues.
That is a major contributing
Right,
factor.
I understand that. So, but over the last 5 years, the number of children in the school system has been steadily decreasing. The number of SPED children have increased, but the overall general population has decreased.
Correct.
And we have to talk about many alternatives. So we've got an alternative for purchasing school buses. You're talking about operational overrides or debt exclusions for the entire town to come up with some money versus some, because you've already kind of defined the populations, some parents paying really not a lot of money to defray the costs. Because you're saying that, I think that it would be wonderful if, because I read that same newspaper article that was in the Standard Times about the mandated SPED transportation and the fact that the towns are being burdened with this, or the schools districts are being burdened with this. Now, Concord...
Just to be clear, it's a combination of SPED and homeless.
And homeless, right. So it was both. But it's significant, particularly in Wareham, because I was shocked at the surrounding towns and how much Wareham is responsible for.
Just so citizens know, the SPED homeless population represents about 400,000 miles a year, and our regular transportation represents about 275,000. That's how much of a change it's been.
Right. It's certainly significant. And that certainly, of course, impacts greatly the operational costs. I mean, even the wear and tear on the buses, all of that.
And of course, SPED transportation is not 50 or 60 kids at a time. It's sometimes as few as one child at a time.
For significant distances.
Exactly.
However, when it's out of town or out of district, we talked about that at the previous meeting, that there's a 50% reimbursement.
Correct. For the homeless.
For the homeless.
That's correct.
So, but not for the SPED. So the
It's
SPED...
It's not so much reimbursement. It costs us to get them there, and it costs the other community to get them back. We don't actually get reimbursed.
But right, I understand. So you pay 50% of the cost. You pay one way.
Yes.
Okay. And then for the homeless population, it is mandated, but unfunded mandate is...
So far.
Right, so far. And I'm really hopeful for something like that.
Yes.
Now, I had some questions about some of the financials that you sent me, but as we discussed earlier, I literally had to use a magnifying glass once I printed them out, because I find it's difficult. I don't know about anybody else, but when you have an Excel spreadsheet, scrolling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and trying to keep the lines. So I printed them, but I don't have a printer with the long paper, so I literally had to get a magnifying glass to look at them. So I really am not prepared to discuss the financials that you sent me, because I only got them a couple days ago, and I can't see them. So... Barry, do you guys have a printer that prints like long sheets?
Do you mean 8 by 14?
Yeah. Would that be possible, do you think? Because I don't...
Do you have one that prints 11 by 17? Okay.
No, it's that, but it would be all in one sheet.
Okay.
Yes.
Not quite as big as your hands.
But no, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
But
yeah,
11
I
by
don't...
17 is very large, and if we've got that, it would be even better.
It would definitely help because it was like crazy with microscopic print.
I'll ask Michelle tomorrow.
That would be awesome. Thank you. I kind of made some notes because before you got to it, I said, well, what about changing times? And, of course, you have the terminology for tiers. And the sped reimbursement we went over. And I had already written, when you had talked about fee-based services, and I wrote right down here, free lunch. I'm sure people on the free lunch program are exempt from that. So I understand all of those that impact. But I still have not had an opportunity to go over to the transportation facility. Thank you. It's the hour is late. The transportation facility to kind of take a tour and see those kinds of things. I really think that would be helpful. And I had a question. One of the things that I did see when I was scrolling back and forth, and it was for significant, I mean, it added up to significant sums. What is NET repairs?
Thank you. Oh, it's probably, if they were significant numbers, it's probably we needed to use, because we didn't have it in the budget, the revolver to repair the undercarriages of some of the buses.
But these were, I mean, you'd see 3 or 4 here, and
Yes.
then down you'd see 3 or 4, and then
Yep.
down you'd see 3 or
Yep.
4, and those were for $5,000 and $6,000, $7,000 at a time.
Big numbers. They were, as the result of inspections, they were found to be rusting to too great an extent. This was also before the pavement had been improved, so they were resting on dirt in too many cases. So, yes, you're right. Those are literally repairs that have been absorbed by the revolver. If we hadn't had the revolver, who knows what we would have done. Well, I can tell you what we would have done. We would have been forced to come back to the town and ask for more money.
Well, my concern is this, that I've been to the garage like once, and is the entire lot paved? I don't recall the entire lot
is
being
now.
paved. All right, when I went, it was not. But I see a great number of buses parked on dirt at people's homes. So we've paved the lot, but the buses don't go there, so they're on grass at people's homes and are going to end up being in the same predicament. I don't understand why that happens.
Your point is well taken. I'll be more than happy to have Mary Jane speak to this, but it actually reduces the number of miles that our buses travel by allowing people to park them at their place of where they live.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is because they frequently drive in the areas in which they live. So this means they don't have to, the bus doesn't go back and forth between the transportation department and where the route is, and so it literally reduces the number of miles. Nevertheless, I share some of your concerns. For the moment, we haven't taken any decision on it with respect to reversing it. I will also tell you that as a result of the state making it that much more difficult to find drivers, it's a competitive advantage for us in the hiring and retention process to allow them to do this. Can it be abused? Yes. We believe it's not. You're right. I mean, it can be abused.
I've seen buses at Stop and Shop, Walmart, Target. I've seen them in those kinds of places. And I'm not saying once in a blue moon.
I cannot speak to any specific situations. All I can tell you is they know they're not supposed to use the vehicles for anything but the transportation of students. Now, if they're parked there and they're not using it to go shopping, I'm not going to necessarily criticize that. But like you, I know that a vehicle can be abused. I have no reason, and I'm not in a position to accuse anybody of doing so.
Just one more
Jane?
question. Just one more question
Sure.
about what you just said. You said the state's making it more difficult for you to get drivers.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. The testing associated with getting a license has become increasingly difficult. And so getting someone to be able to actually get a license. I got my license, for example, I think just before it became more difficult. Pure coincidence. But you need to know what you're doing. In fact, Mary Jane, as a trainer, knows that not everybody that you train passes, because you train and then someone comes and, working for the state, decides whether they know what they're doing and whether they're safe to get behind the wheel of a school bus. So when they make that more difficult, they reduce the pool of people that you can use for drivers, is the bottom line.
But they're safe, they have to comply the tougher standards,
That's exactly right.
which isn't
Which is
always
a
a
good
bad thing.
Yes, everything has a two-edged sword, right?
Right.
The good thing is they're better drivers and they're safer drivers. The bad thing is there's fewer of them.
Yes, I understand. But is the Director of Transportation, the current director, a licensed bus driver?
That's a good question. I know we actually asked that in the interview. Go ahead.
Can I ask the relevance of the question?
Interestingly enough, where he worked, my memory isn't good enough to say with certainty, but I believe First Student, which is where he used to work, didn't want their managers to be drivers because they felt that it took them away from the big picture of running the business. So I'm not certain that he has a license, or if he had a license, then he allowed it to drop. So bottom line is I don't want to speak when I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Mary Jane?
And you have to go close to it.
Well, I didn't expect to find myself in the position of defending the drivers up here, but I just want to point out a couple of things that she brought up. We do have some programs that go to the stores.
Thank you. I didn't even know that.
We do. We have some programs where they take some of the special needs students to shop. They do that to teach them life skills.
Thank you.
We also have the school to work program that brings children to and from jobs that might be seen as a bus at a store. The other point I wanted to make about the training, what happened is the state went from 20 hours to 60, a dramatic increase for someone to get a license, and 32 of those hours are actually behind the wheel. You're not observing, you have to be driving the vehicle yourself. So that's a dramatic change for people trying to get their license.
Thank you for that clarification.
Just so that they know.
That's a lot of, that 32 hours is a lot.
Oh, yeah, I had to get a lot.
Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add? Oh,
Get
okay.
a lot of calls for folks that then can't follow through or follow along with what we're trying, the line of thinking and the dialogue going back and forth. So just bring it a little bit closer.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
to,
I can hear just fine.
thank you, Christian. So,
Christian, excuse me,
no,
Mr. Chairman.
yes.
Thank you, Christian, for that. So those emails will probably stop coming to us, right? Thank you. Okay.
We have little signs on it now.
So since the purpose of this committee is to go back to our respective committees with hopefully a consensus about the way we should be handling transportation, I'd like to try and get a sense of how the committee feels about the various alternatives to funding transportation. As I said, I think in my mind, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, in my mind, even if I thought we could get a superior product, and I don't believe that, but even if I thought we could get a superior product by privatizing it, we can't afford it. It's very clear in my mind we can't afford it. So for me, it comes down to either reducing service or increasing revenue through a combination of debt exclusion or operational override. The difference being that you might, and I know capital planning has thought about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Jane, capital planning has thought about an initial influx of about 10 buses using the debt exclusion route, and then an ongoing purchase of 5 a year to support the school, which would technically be capital, but since it has to be done every year, it would be the equivalent of an operational override. So I'm not suggesting that I know what anybody thinks about this, but I think that's the relevant discussion right now. What do we want to recommend to our respective committees about how to fund transportation? And I'll just throw it out there.
I have some questions first, because where did the number 2.6 million for the lowest bid come from?
It was 2.4 was the lowest bid, and then we added fuel.
When, though? When was that bid? I don't know. I was
June 2011.
Okay, so it's like the last time that they
Yes.
they researched it. You're going with those numbers.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Basically.
Anything else?
I will ask another question about the comparison to our cost, because I'm confused about our cost, only because it looks like to me, like that was last year's amount that you quoted, the 1.5, right?
No, the operational budget submitted by the town for by the school committee for FY13 is 1.585.
Oh, so you're not going by the actual, what it's actually costing us to run, you're going by what the town is going to contribute.
We're hoping they'll contribute. But that budget is based upon what we think is needed, excluding vehicle replacements, to run the department. Keeping in mind that although we were funded at a significantly lower level in prior years, the only reason we were able to do it was because we took money out of the revolver. The revolver is now mostly empty. There's a small amount of money left in the revolver, but it's not sufficient to support the operating budget. Yes. I'm sorry, but technically,
That's okay, you have to
Mary Jane,
finish.
are you all set?
Actually, I had one more, I just have one more, only because I feel like if you're doing apples to apples, then you really have to go by not what the town contributes, but what we actually spend.
Well, and that's exactly why we put the P&L together the way we did. We ignored its actual estimates for this year and budget for next year, but the end result at the very bottom of the P&L shows you the actual contribution of the town, which is the initial money raised at town meeting, and then the deficit created by the true recognition of the cost. For example, if you don't recognize the cost of depreciation, you're really kidding yourself because the buses are depreciating. So doing that, you come up with what I hope is a very realistic number of what it's truly costing the town when you include everything. We included, for example, the in-kind expenses that are normally just never show up anywhere except in a negotiation between the town and the school on paper. Okay? We included that. We included retirement costs. We included a lot of things that would normally not get included so that it created a true picture of what it's costing the town.
And then, I would say this about it, is then you quoted a price based on reducing the fleet, but the 2.6 actually is a bid that was given based on what we do now.
That is correct. That is correct.
Just so
Yep.
I know we're all on the same page.
Ellen?
Thanks, I wrote it down because I would forget. You said the revolving account's almost empty, but 2 weeks ago we were going to buy, or it was requested to buy 2 sped buses out of that account.
Not buses, vans,
Well, vans,
used,
yeah.
and I think the total expense was going to be,
Approximately $28,000.
Okay.
that's a low number compared to what we've had in the past. That's what I consider almost empty.
All right, because but was it in the spring you purchased a sped bus?
Yes.
Yes. And then I just have a question, Mary Jane, to clarify. I know that we keep talking about depreciating buses and depreciating the equipment. Do municipalities usually do depreciation? I mean, is that something that's customary? Because I was doing
Yes
some
and no.
research. Right, I was doing some research, and I didn't really see that as the case.
The depreciation doesn't show up on the town meeting budget, but it does show up in other areas of Mark's budget, required by law. So municipalities are funny. Corporations, you see it. You see it. Municipalities are different. So it's there, but it doesn't show up as an expense when you're balancing your budget, is the bottom line.
Right, I understand. Because when I was doing the research, I'm like, why can't I find this?
Right. You won't find it. But you will find it in the financial statements.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that it's unfortunate, and I think it was, well, first of all, I don't have a copy of the agenda with me. And would you mind just reading the agenda so that anybody that's watching or here, did you bring an agenda?
No.
I didn't either.
But
No, we had an agenda. Didn't we have an
yes,
agenda?
in fact, it was published with the posting.
The posting.
Yes.
I didn't bring mine, so I don't even know if I'm going off the ranch with anything.
The focus was going to be how to pay for the transportation services. It was a very small agenda.
Right, I understand. And I absolutely want to continue that conversation, and I think it was It was an honest mistake when I'm glad I sent you a reminder email saying,
So am I.
I still didn't get this information, and I'm having a tough time being able to really read it.
Keep in mind that although it's valuable information, it's going to show you where the money went, as it did with the New England Transit and their repair of the undercarriages. It doesn't change the numbers.
I understand that, but I need to know, similar to, and this is an expectation that I've heard from many, just like in our own household budgets, in order to know where I'm going, I have to know where I've been and where I am. So I'm not dismissing anything that's being said. I think that, and I hope that everybody on this committee is keeping an open mind, because it all boils down to there's an issue, and this issue needs to be addressed. So I get it, and I know that you've been fighting this battle for a long time, and that's why you want to name this the Action Committee. But was it just Monday that I got the information? Was it just Monday? Because I just
Yes.
emailed you over
Yes.
the weekend, I believe.
Yes.
And I can't read it, unfortunately. So even if I wouldn't even mind meeting early next week or even at the end of the week, if this committee would prefer. But I just don't feel like I've had the opportunity to really look at where we've been.
I have no problem accelerating the meeting time so that we truly can be an action
I would.
committee.
I would very much like to do that.
Happy to do that. Having said that, as much as we want as much transparency as possible, and I also agree that an open mind is critical for two reasons. One is it's generically a good thing to have, but secondly, we have no idea how the taxpayers are going to react to whatever solution we might present to them. And after all, everybody in a sense is advisory. And so even if we think something's a good idea, and the citizens say, yeah, not today, it's a bad idea, then we have to be able to implement whatever the taxpayers tell us to implement.
Plan B.
Plan B, exactly. And from my perspective, the fees/reductions in services are the Plan B, if you will. I can't think of another Plan B, frankly. Now, my problem with Plan B, and I know this is going to sound pejorative, but to me it's almost a little bit like the tyranny of the majority. And by that I mean pure democracy, in fact, is tyrannical. That's why we have a constitution, a Bill of Rights, a Supreme Court. That's why we are representative democracy as compared to a pure democracy. We might still have slavery if it was up to pure democracy. So when I know we just had a once every 10-year review by the State Department of Education of our school system. They were here for a full week. We survived it. We haven't gotten a report yet, so we'll see. But it was when about a third of our population have people in the school system. That means 2/3 of the people don't have a direct connection, vested interest in the schools. And if those same 2/3, if a significant percentage of those 2/3 are fighting to put food on the table and keep shelter over their heads, it's a really difficult situation for education. And I think, not unique to Wareham, that may be what we're facing in communities in general. So that it disturbs me that we might be faced with a Plan B that is going to be imposed by the 2/3 on the 1/3, even though in my mind there's a social contract that says I was bused, I was educated, and just because I'm not a kid anymore and I may not have a kid in the house doesn't give me the right to say, but I'm not going to do it for the next generation. So I think it's important, and now I really am editorializing, and I really am getting philosophical, but I do think it's important, one vote, one person who's trying to develop a consensus, that we think about the fact that third should not be abused, and it's time to support them as much as possible. And I would hate to think that we say to a parent who has literally no way of getting to their kid to school, other than through bus transportation services, sorry, we're not going to provide it.
Can I just respond?
Please. It wasn't intended to be.
No, and I do, Jeff. I think that's heartfelt. However, the cold hard facts is that we have town meeting.
Yes.
So that's who is going to determine. Whatever. Hopefully, we can come to a consensus. I know that that's something that you're working towards. But we do have. What's the number of students? 3,000.
About 3,000.
About 3,000. So we have 20,000 full-time residents, and 3,000 are students. So just as you said, we have 50% of the budget goes to the schools as it is. I'm not saying that it's not deserved. Believe me, I think it's deserved. I am all about education. However, we're going to ask people, and that's why this is what I'm hearing, is either it's going to be like Plan B would be fee for service, which pros and cons. We've got pros and cons all over the place. We just kind of have to weigh them. Fee for service, which I had even written down here, and I was glad that you addressed it. How would that impact attendance? I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about any kind of dropout rate. I'm concerned about truancy. I am. They need to go and they need to be educated. But at the same time, asking the other 17,000, well, more than that. So we've got 17,000.
3,000 doesn't include the parents.
Right. But we're also not including this 40,000 people that pay those property taxes because, so they don't really, right, but they're not vested into our educating our children. Right. So having like an operational override or debt exclusions is going to be a hard sell. It's going to be a hard sell. We're already hearing on the news, oil prices are going up. They're having conversations about will gasoline, which again will affect us even though we pay the municipal rate, fuel going up to almost $5 a gallon by Memorial Day. People are having a tough time getting by. So that's why, and I hope I'm not coming across as being nitpicking, but I cannot be part of a consensus until I feel like I'm fully informed and that we have the ability to fully inform the population in the town of Wareham. So I understand where you're coming from, and I understand your passion, and I know that all of this, everything we're talking about, all those prices are only going to go up. I get that. But that's happening in people's personal budgets as well. So even if we said, okay, it only, like I remember when you said, and you were trying to put it in perspective for people saying $63 is what we're talking about. But when you're talking about people that are living paycheck to paycheck, that's a lot of money. So if we're going to have a consensus, then, as I said before, if people feel informed, if they feel like they're part of the process, if they feel engaged as a community, then I, for one, would be behind something and would encourage other people to do so as well. But it's not that you've kept me from the information. It's that as I ask for it, I just need time. I need the time to absorb it, and I don't feel like 2 days is enough time for me to absorb.
That's not a problem in any way.
The information.
And I want to be clear. I think it's a disgrace that we're in a position where we may have to ask the citizens of this town to come up with more money. Because 10 years ago, Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, well, Barry would be in a position to correct me wrong. He wasn't superintendent, but he was intimately involved in the school system. 10 years ago, we actually had enough money. It's the failure of the state to maintain Chapter 70 at a level sufficient to support this and other schools that is causing this problem.
In unfunded mandates.
Unfunded mandates. And on top of that, most people don't remember, but because I was on the FinCom, I remember we used to get $250,000 a year in transportation reimbursement.
And that's gone?
It's gone, completely gone.
But we still had to maintain the same level of services.
Exactly.
And running at a deficit of, because you get accustomed to that money as part of the income, and now you're running at a $250,000 deficit,
right.
Like that.
So if you combine the McKinney-Vento impact with the $250,000 loss in reimbursement, it would almost, not quite, but almost solve the transportation problem in this town. The state doesn't care about that, or if they do care, they're not showing any evidence of it, because in the end, they don't give us reimbursement sufficient to provide the service. And that's just the non-net side. The net side is a whole nother story. So I hear you. I understand completely what you're saying. It just grinds on me that we're even in a position to have to consider debt exclusions and operational overrides. But the alternative is, let's put it this way, and this is definitely a philosophical question. If it's $180 a year for a third of the population, or $60 a year for every member of the population, what is the fairest thing to do? That's a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to answer the question.
No, let me respond, because you're talking about the $63 a year only on the school side.
No, I wasn't. I was talking about assuming we went to
No, and I understand what you're saying. 180 for a small.
Fees for transportation. That would be approximately $180. If everybody paid it, it would end up being a third of that versus only the parents paying it, and that would be 3 times as much.
But we're only talking about school transportation.
That's exactly
We're
right.
not talking about, because that's what we are.
Right.
We're the school transportation, action committee. However, to be fair, there is extraordinary need on the town side. So how do we address that? And we can't, the town side is addressing, including those school children and their families and the rest of the town. So that's the town side of the budget. So we're in a very difficult position. We all saw this coming.
Yes.
We were at that last spring. We were all having this whole conversation saying, we talked about the healthcare trust fund holiday, and we were saying we are kicking the can down the road.
We've
And
actually
we
been
knew
kicking
that.
We've been kicking it down for longer than a year.
So the FinCom can certainly address this, because this has been a runaway train coming down the tracks. We've all seen it coming. Well, it's here.
Yes.
So we have to deal, and there's going to be difficult decisions. So it's not only going to be, this puts us, we're in a difficult position. But I agree that consensus is key. So I'd be happy to meet sooner than later, as opposed to 2 weeks. I'd be happy to meet in a week if I just can have the opportunity of being able to go over those financials and getting myself to the transportation department.
I know Ellen and I have been monopolizing the conversation.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I said you and me, not just you. Does anybody have anything else that we should talk about?
Setting the date for the next
Yes,
meeting.
that was my next, the only item left, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't think we can truly talk about the substance of Plan A, B, or C until we feel totally comfortable with the current status. So I think either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week would be a great idea. Tuesday we can't do. Wednesday, we're not meeting until the 29th, correct?
We're open next week.
So we are open next week. So how about same time?
Finance committee meeting.
Same time we could, what's your preference, Mark, in terms of location? We could go back to the middle school, or we could be here. It doesn't matter to me, either way. Christian, which is easier for you?
It doesn't matter. I like this room.
Fine. Okay. So how about same time, same place, a week from today?
Hold on, no.
Could-
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Please.
just inform the committee, we have a finance committee meeting, I think at 6:30 on the 22nd. Do
Oh, dear. Can we meet earlier? Would that
Yes.
be better?
you want to meet at
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
We meet earlier.
I'm happy to.
5:30?
5:30?
The way
5?
we talk? 5.
5.
5 is better.
So that gives us
Yeah,
an hour and a
I was-
half before the FinCom? Is that what we're saying?
Mr. Chairman, I was just hopeful to buy a vowel at some point. Just
You know, Words with Friends doesn't allow you to buy vowels.
5 p.m. in this room.
Yes.
You're going to post what's going to be
Yes.
the agenda,
And
or
the-
you'll determine it. I had another question. Oh, Barry, is it possible for, I'm sure, that all the members of the committee would get that longer Excel spreadsheet?
I will print them out and have them available. Anybody who wants to drop by, they can pick it up.
Bigger font?
And in the meantime, please get over to see Jeff. He would be happy to have you
Yes.
visit. I understand. Okay. Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.